Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto, and in this video I'm gonna check out this Panasonic LEICA 100-400 telephoto zoom lens. But before we check out this lens, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the bell right there so you'll get notified whenever I post a new video. And I usually post on Tuesdays and on Fridays. And now, about this lens. I'd also like to mention that this lens is not mine. This is on loan from the Finnish importer Focus Nordic. But I'm not getting paid to make this video. I make this video and all my videos only to share my experiences with you guys. This is not a new lens. This is almost 4 years old. This was announced in January 2016. But this is extremely popular and there's no other lens in the whole Micro Four Thirds lineup that can touch 400mm. So even today this lens deserves a proper look. The focal length of this lens is from 100 to 400mm. And with that, this falls into so-called super telephoto category. And for a super telephoto, this is amazingly compact. In full frame terms, the equivalent angle of view would be from 200 to 800mm. Of course, the compactness comes from the relatively modest f6.3 aperture at the long end, but even so, look at this thing. This is amazing reach or range in almost pocket size. The build quality of this lens really feels like pro grade. The outer case or barrel is metal and the inner part of the inner barrel of the zoom is some sort of plastic. But the whole construction seems really well put together and solid, and of course it's also weather sealed. And somehow it feels a lot like the 12 to 60mm Panasonic LEICA lens. They are of course two totally different lenses, but the feel is very similar in both these lenses. The focus ring is smooth and fly-by-wire. There's nothing much to say about it. It works if you need manual focus. Then there is a focus lock ring. You can lock the zoom to any focal length, which is kind of handy if you for some reason need or want to shoot many frames at the same exact focal length. You can lock it and then you don't accidentally change the focal length. But the zoom ring is not the smoothest possible, at least on this sample. This is on loan from the Finnish importer Focus Nordic, and I have no idea what this lens has been through before I got it. Anyhow, the zoom ring is a little bit like a notch or edgy, especially towards the long end, and sometimes it can be a bit hard to set the desired framing, and it doesn't make it any easier that the zooming becomes like progressive when you go towards the long end. So sometimes it can be a bit hard to set the exact framing you want. The lens shade is pretty interesting, two-piece affair. There's this small sliding piece and then this bigger piece that you can put on top of the small piece and tighten it. Somehow I wonder, would it be possible to design just one piece lens shade that would slide over the lens? Because now I think this particular piece is something you can potentially lose at some point. And then of course there's a rotating tripod collar, which is a very interesting design. The switches on the side of the lens, they will not rotate with the lens, so if you turn it to a vertical or portrait orientation, the switches stay on the side of the lens, and I think it's very good for the handling. This lens weighs in at about 1 kilogram, which is pretty amazing considering the very robust construction and the super telephoto reach. This is a long lens when mounted on a camera body, but it feels reasonably balanced on the G9 and even on the smaller G90 camera bodies. I think even one-handed operation could be possible, but it's not recommended with such a narrow angle of view. But this lens is very comfortable to hold when it's mounted on a camera body, and it's not uncomfortable to carry around even for the whole day. And the optical construction is 20 elements in 13 groups, so there's a lot of glass inside of this lens, and there are spherical and special glass elements also to make sure the image quality is top notch. And the minimum focusing distance is only 1.3 meters, which doesn't sound like a really close focus, but if you think about the 400mm focal length, you can get really nice and high magnification with this lens, and this almost doubles as a macro lens too. The maximum aperture is from f4 to f6.3. And especially at the long end, the f6.3 is not really that fast. But I guess the designers prioritized the portability, and the maximum aperture comes from there. The smaller the aperture, the smaller the lens. And I think the 6.3 is still a reasonable compromise. Besides, this lens has a stabilizer built in, and that combined with Panasonic's in-body stabilizer, you get the excellent dual O.I.S, which allows you to shoot in pretty low light without cranking up the ISO unnecessarily, if your subject allows you to use relatively long shutter speeds. The optical qualities of this lens are quite excellent. The sharpness and contrast are really good throughout the whole zoom range. And the best results come at wide open or very slightly stopped down aperture. But with this kind of super telephoto, it's very easy to get a lot of air between your camera and your subject, and that can cause unsharpness in your final image, because there are probably a lot of particles in the air, and on a warm day the air also ripples, and that makes these tiny little wavy forms or formations in your final picture, and then nothing looks sharp anymore. Can look very artistic but not sharp. And the distortions, vignetting and chromatic aberrations are corrected either in camera or in some RAW developers, or some RAW developers apply the corrections automatically. So in most cases they are nothing to worry about. So all in all, I would say that you should be able to get really crisp and sharp results on this lens if you just do your part properly. The autofocus speed is really fast, and also the results are accurate. But in some cases, if you're at the closest focusing distance, for example, and then you'd like to focus at somewhere very far, almost at infinity, sometimes the focus can hesitate a bit because it doesn't quite know where to go, because everything is blurry. But this kind of behavior is quite normal with any super telephoto lens in the similar situation. And there is also a focus limiter that limits the focusing distance from 5 meters to infinity, and that can prevent some unnecessary hunting or misfocused pictures if your target is somewhere pretty far away. It seems to me that Panasonic's designers really hit the sweet spot with this lens. The size, the reach, and also the price are all in the right ballpark. And also the popularity of this lens kind of proves it. There are so many people interested in wildlife photography, and that's what this lens is really made for. At the time of making this video, the price of this lens seems to be around 1,400 euros or US dollars, give or take. And that's really not a lot of money for this kind of zoom range, optical performance, and all other professional features like weather sealing that you get. And the fact that this is a zoom lens makes this a lot more practical in real-world use compared to a prime lens. Because when you're using a long telephoto lens, it can be really difficult, if not impossible, to move from your current position closer to your subject or further away from your subject to change the framing. But with a zoom lens, you can change the framing just by turning the ring. But when I was using this lens, I struggled a bit to find something to shoot. For me, this lens is way too long, and I think if I was getting a long telephoto zoom, I would get the 50-200mm lens. But I'm not a wildlife photographer, and I totally get it if you are into any kind of wildlife or animal nature photography, why you would lust over this lens. Currently, I think this is the best option for Micro Four Thirds shooter who's interested in any kind of wildlife or similar photography. You get excellent image quality, excellent build quality, weather sealing for, if not cheap, but for very reasonable price. I think so. So that's my biased opinion on this lens. Please check out also other reviews before you buy anything. Thank you so much for watching, but before you go, you may want to check out these couple of videos that I chose for you. Thank you.